All right. Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and I am joined by Kevin, Nontradicath. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Hey, doing well, Dale. Thanks so much for having me back on.
Excellent. Yeah, it's been forget the last time you were on the show, we Marian apparitions, or was it
I
something else?
it was we did Marian apparitions and we did Eucharistic miracle stuff one after the other, and I don't recall which one was more recent and more distant in time. But those were the two last things that we talked about for sure. And so now we're back for Eucharistic miracles, but post the debate. So I think this is going to be like a good follow up kind of to that historic episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why we're here today, guys. Basically, Kevin just a few days ago did a debate, so I've been promising my audience that I was going to have Kevin come on to do a debate with Dr. Franco Serafini and Massimo Paris kind of helping him out as a translator. And disappointingly, that did not come about. Dang you, Franco. But the good news is that Matt, who I think did an amazing job, probably better than Franco could have done himself, just given the language issues, but he did amazing in that debate and stuff. So you guys had a really informative back and forth there. But yeah, just before I give my own thoughts, I'll just go to you, Kevin. Like as a participant, what were kind of your thoughts about how the debate went?
I just want to first echo your praise of Matthew. I think Matthew did a fantastic job. I think the debate was really cool. It was definitely we were changing the format up until the very last minute. So ultimately, what wound up happening is we both recorded and then promptly sent each other our opening statements the night before the debate. Also, keep in mind, Matthew was in France and I'm in the Eastern US, same time zone as you, Dale. So because of the 6 hour difference between us, we didn't have as much time as we would like. If we did it late in the day, for me, like the time that you and I are talking right now, which is after our work hours, I mean, it is currently like it's 12:30, like midnight, in France right now. So this time wouldn't work. So the only time that really did work was like 6 a.m. for me, and that's really early for me. We
Yeah.
were going to try to do a full debate in that time, where we did 20-minute openings and then just like an hour and 20 minutes of open dialogue. Um, but last minute, we decided, hey, let's just exchange opening statements the night before. And then we can do the debate the following morning, where we're just going to do one response from Matthew and then the rest open dialogue. Um, but I mean, honestly, I'm fine with that. I'm one of those people who thinks that debate is mostly theater anyway. Like
Hmm.
I don't think that debate does a very good job of like changing people's minds. Um, but what I do think does a good job of changing people's minds is just like having a real conversation about it. Um, and we were able to do that. Like on the morning of the debate, the vast majority of it was just a real conversation. And that's what I'm all about. I love the real conversation, way more than like the theater of the debate. And we got to do that. So for that, I was very, very grateful. And I think it went really well for both of us. I think we were both able to put forward our best feet, I think. Yeah. I had a great time, and Matthew's a great guy too. And we're planning more discussions in the future too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I wish I was there to be kind of a host for that, but 6 a.m. like for this Canadian, even that's just too much. Like I genuinely like doing shows early, but like the earliest is like 8 a.m. or something that I think I would do. But yeah, you kudos to you for 6 a.m. and you're doing a debate. You did an incredible job on your end. So yeah, just to give my sort of very general overview thoughts before we start hunkering down here. So yeah, like I said, I thought it was a really good debate, and the reason why, so that I disagree kind of with what Kevin said. I like debates. I really make my decisions based on seeing points and counterpoints between well-informed and well-prepared opponents. And again, it's not about trying to score points or something like that, but that's why I really enjoyed this thing is I thought there was points, counterpoints, a counterpoint. I could kind of follow along and see, okay, well, who's got the better thing to make a decision. And you don't always get that in debate. So kudos on the style and the format. Now, yeah, so for my audience, Kevin knows this, but I'm a Protestant, hardcore Protestant, and my bias is against Eucharistic miracles. I was definitely rooting for Kevin to kick his butt or something like that, right? But that didn't happen. If I'm just judging based on the debate being objective and fair, I think I would actually say that Matt won the debate, and I felt like saying you almost persuaded me to be a Catholic there or something. But
Ooh, oh man. I've been told that I'm the best Catholic apologist on YouTube. So here's another a notch in my belt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think one of the issues, so something problematic, something bad was the formatting because you were clearly at a bit of an unfair disadvantage in that, his opening's 1 hour, yours was strictly 20 minutes, and then he also had like a structured rebuttal period and you didn't, and then you just went into the cross-examine. So that's kind of an unfair thing that kind of slanted it in his favor. And just because of that, he had more time. So I think he kind of got to raise points that you just never even got a chance to respond to or counter. So yeah, that would be kind of the only criticism I would have of it. Go ahead.
Yeah. And just to let the audience know too, we agreed to the 20-minute openings, but then part of the reason why we ultimately decided to do the openings the night before was Matthieu said that he had way too much to fit into 20 minutes. And I told Matthieu, I'm not interested in like winning. I'm interested in having the best conversation that we can. So if you need an hour to spell out your opening statement, then that's great. I said, mine's already done. My slides are done in time to 20 minutes. I'm not going to change them. But if you need an hour, man, you go for it. And I think that the debate is better for it. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think Matthieu would have been able to get all of his points across if he didn't have an hour. So I don't, I have absolutely no problem with making the debate better, even if I don't score points that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I said, I'm not trying to keep score. I'm trying to have the best conversation possible.
makes perfect sense.
So just so that the audience knows, there was nothing shifty going on. Matthieu said, "Hey man, I really think I'm just going to need longer than 20 minutes. Do you mind?" I said, "I do not mind in the slightest." So just
Awesome.
wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, cool. So yeah, let's kind of get into, I guess, some specifics, and stuff like that. So let's kind of start with your case. Yours is the shorter one. So, your kind of approach was giving the sort of generalized methodological concerns and stuff, so you can summarize it for the audience. No peer review. There were, testing into compliance, which was, I think, your best point, and I think one where you won the debate on, in my opinion, at least on that specific issue. But yeah, like what was your thoughts? Like, why did you want to start off with the basic general methodological points, which some Roman Catholics might kind of just dismiss or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start off with the methodological points because I honestly think they're the most important. Um, if the methodology isn't right, then we really can't even trust the results, even if we, think that they are confirming. What do I mean by that? Let's say that I was, and I use the drug analogies all the time because I work in pharma, but let's say that a company put forward, a new drug and they said, hey, this is going to cure, you know, insert disease here. It's going to cure it. Um, and what's our proof? Well, we've got this one doctor here who said, yep, it'll cure it. I think everyone would probably be like, guys, I don't know if we should trust this random pharma company. Why? Well, the doctor sure said it's gonna, they've got a doctor, right? Well, what's the problem here? It's the methodology. Getting one doctor's opinion simply isn't how science is done. Science is done via peer review, by publishing in journal articles. It's done with controls, it's done with blinding. And if those things aren't done, I don't think that we can trust the results. Let's continue with this scenario. Let's say that a second pharma company comes out with another drug that's supposed to cure the same thing, and they say that their guy actually says that the first doctor is wrong, that drug doesn't work, and ours does work, but they also don't publish their results. Are we justified in believing that that first doctor was wrong now? No, I don't think so, because they also didn't use peer review. Well, are we justified in believing that first doctor was correct? No, I don't think so, because he didn't provide any peer review either. We simply must withhold judgment. And why must we withhold judgment? Because the scientific process simply was not followed. So I think that methodology is actually more important than the individual cases. Now, it just so happens when you look into the individual cases, I think that a lot of the actual science done is also problematic for different reasons. You alluded to one, testing into compliance. Um, but I think that the methodology is actually more important than the individual practices of testing into compliance or anything like that.
Okay, so one thing, so Matt kind of had his counter to that, right? So he kind of came back and I think even in your opening, it almost sounded like you might have agreed with him. So you're kind of saying like without the proper methodology, we should suspend our judgment. We can't believe. Matt was saying, well, look, these things are ideal, peer review, no blinding, stuff like that. These things are ideals, but they're not necessary for belief because what we have, the evidence that we have, is sufficient to believe. That was kind of his counter to you. And from what I understood in the debate, I thought you kind of said yes, that could work hypothetically.
Yeah, so I think it's like an in principle agreement, but a in practice disagreement. So here's what I mean by that. Um, I believe in a ton of things that I don't have peer reviewed, double blind journal articles,
Right.
to back up. Um,
You're talking to me right now, for example.
yes, I don't have a peer reviewed blinded journal article that says that I really am talking to you right now, but I believe it anyway. Um, Now, those things that I believe are generally going to be pretty mundane claims. Um, Regular old bread that turns into the literal flesh, any flesh for that matter. That's not mundane, so I'm probably going to need like a higher bar of evidence than that. Um, so that's one concern that I would have with like well, you're right, it's ideal, but the best we have is just what we have, and what we have is compelling enough. My first response is, well, whatever we have, it better be spectacular, because if we don't have peer review or blinding or things like that, um, and this is not a mundane claim, like, all of a sudden, that to me is already concerning. But then the second part, and then this is the part that we kind of spent a long time talking about in terms of like the hematology and the blood typing and the and just also all of the actual like the AP samples, just like looking at the slides under the microscope. Um, all of those are going to be what we actually have. And is that enough? I still think that the answer is no, even though in principle I could agree.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So that makes sense. And that was one thing that I thought was a very interesting general point that came up during the Q&A period, actually, was Matt asked you about necessary and sufficient conditions. And for him, he really wanted to stress the necessary part because your answer was, well, look, the DNA, he had three things. There's the heart tissue, the blood type comes back AB, and there's the DNA studies. And Matt almost kind of conceded that yeah, maybe you can just the DNA is not good enough, and the blood has type AB thing may or may not have problems and stuff like that. But he's like the heart tissue, that's the rock that is, you know, for him necessary and sufficient. No, but you were kind of saying that that's not necessary and sufficient. So like what's your take on if you're really thinking like what is necessary there? Because on my end, I was thinking that you were both wrong. Like I can pick like let's pretend it's transformed into lung tissue. If the purpose of the debate is to prove a supernatural miracle, bred into a lung, that's a miracle, if it's confirmed. So what were you guys thinking? What were you thinking in terms of the necessary and sufficient conditions? And like, what are your thoughts now after the debate?
Yeah, yeah. So I think in order for me to sketch my thoughts on like necessary and sufficient, I should first mention that um so I'm going to list two kind of general categories here. Um, there are different kinds of results when we do different kinds of scientific tests. Some results are qualitative and some results are quantitative. Um, So an example of a qualitative would be something that's not like a number. It's maybe like a yes, no, or even there's a very commonly performed test on urine samples. It's part of a standard urinalysis panel. It's just called appearance. What is the appearance of this urine? And so, like very cloudy urine, and I'm sorry if this is gross, but very cloudy urine might be an indicator of like an illness within the patient. But cloudy is a qualitative result. And then there are quantitative results. So an example of a quantitative result might be like the red blood cell count or the white blood cell count or the hematocrit, or I mean, there's a million of them. But these are things that are going to give you a number with units at the end. So the and units might be like, it might be like, units per deciliter, or it might be, there's grams per meter is a unit, and not one used in pharma. But those are two different kinds of results. To me, I place far more emphasis, and so does the pharma community in general and the scientific community in general, on quantitative results that have numbers rather than qualitative results. Histology, the kind of histology that was done in these Eucharistic miracle cases, it's all qualitative. It's just somebody looking at a picture and then being like, "Yep, looks like heart tissue to me," and then that's it. There's no actual testing being done. It's just looking at a slide and then being like, "Yep, checks out. That looks right to me." The quantitative results are going to be the things like the DNA and the AB blood typing. The AB blood typing is quantitative too. And so I think that Matthieu places, he probably would agree with this. I'm trying not to put words in his mouth or anything, but the most important thing is the opinion of the histologists and medical examiners who looked at the samples. And for me, I'm going to say, no, contraire. The most important part is the quantitative results. And I'm so sorry. You actually asked like a specific question. And then I went off on this quantitative thing. What was the specific question?
Well, you know what? I think you might have answered it. And I
Okay.
think you raised a good point, because this was something I thought was a good point in the debate, right? So I think for you, what you're saying is what necessary criteria for you are there has to be some quantitative results
Yes. Mm-hmm.
backing it up. If there's a lack of quantitative and it's just qualitative observations, that's not good enough for you, kind of thing.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me about the necessary and sufficient thing. I would need some kind of quantitative results in my, I'm not even saying necessarily DNA. If I thought that the AB blood typing thing was solid, I think that might be, I'd have to think about that more because it's always hard to think about yourself in a counterfactual way.
Right.
Um, but the blood typing thing would be huge. It would be at least huge if it were solid. I don't think it's solid. We can talk about that more. But then the DNA thing is like, the DNA thing, Matthieu agrees that the DNA thing, it's just not there. Like there's no DNA
Yeah, there's no
evidence.
STRs, I think is
Right. There's
what I
no human
remember.
STRs. Yeah. Which, and the STR point is something too that if you detected human STRs, you wouldn't know the full human genome. You would just know that it is human DNA,
Yeah.
and not even the human STRs popped up.
Yeah.
So,
So that's kind of a specific point, and we'll get to that. But
yeah.
yeah, that was you argued in the debate. That's why it's more indicative of human contamination when people touched it rather
Right.
than like DNA itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that makes sense. I do have one crafty little follow-up on the necessary and sufficient conditions, if you don't mind. And I
Yeah.
feel it is related because hey, I'm the shroud guy, and the shroud was a part of this. But now I know that you go for Walter Macron's results, trying to find paint on using his PLM microscope. And I'm just kind of wondering, is there maybe a bit of a double standard there on your part that you're not, because he did observations through his microscope. All of the quantitative investigations are debatable. They're not conclusive in terms of paint. There's equally probable different interpretations. So like I just wanted to sneak that in. Do you think there may be a bit of a double standard or?
Um, so full disclosure, You know way more about the shroud than I do. Um, so anything that I say here, people should listen to Dale over me. I thought that I recalled, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't read about the shroud in a long time. Um, I thought that I remembered reading in that one book that I got all my Macron stuff from, um, that he actually tested for and found like specific like iron oxides and things like that, things that would be used in like a red paint around that time. Um, and so I would place more weight on something like that, like the actual detection of iron oxide. Um, if all here, I can answer the question in the kind of like if this then
Hypothetical.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, if all that was occurring is looking at something being like, yep, looks like pigment to me, then I would agree. I would be a hypocrite if I said that. And if that's what it turns out to be, then I formally retract what I said about Macron and all that. Um, if, however, there was a empirical component to it, which is what I remember, but again, not an expert, and I could totally be wrong about that. But if there was this quantitative piece as well, like, oh, I detected that the iron parts per million was actually much higher than you would expect if there was no iron oxide here, and something like that, then that might be something that would be like a symmetry breaker.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, at this point, okay. Oh, so general questions. Okay, another general one. Is probably the most important general question. Again, it came up during the Q&A. And it was a question Matt asked you about, and he was saying, let's pretend he proves whatever he's saying, DNA, or you're convinced that there's some kind of supernatural miracle taking place here. And he said, would you then convert? And you answered yes. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just believe it or not, I would answer no. So I just wanted to
Huh.
probe you, like why would you answer yes, first of all?
Um, So I believe the way that I sketched it out was something like this. If we found the DNA of like what we expected the DNA of a Jew from 2000 years ago would have, and it was the same DNA across all these miracles across decades and stuff like that. Um, to me, I mean, that's pretty darn good evidence that we have bread turning into Jesus's flesh.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, man.
Yeah, well, I
If
would
we have
believe that.
evidence of that, I think that would make me believe in like the real presence. And so then, and I think I couched my answer in like I wouldn't necessarily be Catholic, but I would be like Catholic or Orthodox, or like I know a lot of Anglicans and stuff like
Like
that will have.
an
Yeah,
apostolic
yeah,
Christian.
right.
Okay. Okay. Well, here is what I was thinking, and I wanted to ask you about this as a general question. So here's why look, I grant everything you want. In terms of that, I would still not be a believer, even in a general apostolic Christianity. And the reason is because what we're saying is these Eucharistic miracles are serving as what I call a religion authenticating miracle. And the context is everything. So in the first place, we have to ask, is it serving to authenticate a specific denomination? And number one, you've already answered no, because it's really kind of like a falsification, if any, at best, of Protestantism or something like that, right? Or certain denominations, but it doesn't specify which denomination you should be. So right there, it's not a religion authenticating miracle. That indicates to me there's another
Um,
purpose, possibly. Go ahead.
I mean, I think this is all going to just kind of come down to how we want to gerrymander the word religion. But to me, I think this would be proof of like Christianity, at least, like Christianity at large would be true. That's how I would view it anyway.
Okay, okay. Well, look, given that, right, because it does authenticate within the wider view of Christians, that means we get attached the Protestant Bible. And as the Bible warns us, it says, look, we should judge, even if a supernatural miracle or an angel themselves come down in heaven, that I could grant a Eucharistic miracle took place. But is it from Satan or from God? And on that front, you need to judge it in light of the total evidence, the positive and negative evidence. Does Catholicism or Orthodoxy contradict the Bible or not? And So there's still a way of going like just even if there's a Eucharistic miracle, that alone is insufficient to judge kind of thing. You need the full evidences. So that was what I wanted to ask you about.
Would it at least convince you then of some sort of supernaturalism being true? Like,
Yeah,
um,
that's undeniable. Like I'm saying that's
okay,
proven.
okay,
I'm assuming
okay,
it's
yeah,
undeniable.
then maybe I'm right there with you. Maybe you're right. Maybe I wouldn't be able to rule that out technically from, some kind of trickster god or something, who like wanted to fool me into becoming an apostolic Christian when really like Hinduism is the real, whatever. You're right. I guess I couldn't rule that out. Um, Although I don't know, I just feel like with my background and stuff, if those were proven, I think I'd wind up being, even if it was irrational for me to do so, I still think I'd wind up being religious again,
Fair enough.
specifically apostolic Christianity.
All right, fair enough. All right, cool. So yeah, I think that does it in terms of my kind of very general questions. Is there anything on the general cases that I've missed that you wanted to get my take on before we move on to the specific cases?
I think if I was to like summarize the case, let me see if I can state this in a way where I'm going to try to state it in a way where Matthew and I would both agree, and I want to see if you think that Matthew and I would both agree on this. So, the way that the case goes is that there's three main like lines of evidence as I see it. Um, there's the histology, which is just like the looking at the slide, and then there's the AB blood type, and then there's like the DNA. Those are kind of like the three main categories that I'm going to look at. Um, Matthew and I both agree that there are histologists who look at it and say, "Yep, it's for sure human heart tissue." But we also agree that other histologists looked at it and said, "No, no, no, no known morphology. Also, we think it's skin or we think it's muscle or stuff like that."
Mhm.
So we both agree there. Then on the AB, I think that we both agreed that you can test positive for A and B antigens even in the absence of any actual blood, and the chances of these samples being contaminated is quite high. So I think that we agreed there. Um, and then the DNA, and we just both agreed that there's just we couldn't find any human DNA. And so I think that after we kind of agree on the evidence, it's just a matter of like credences. Like how much credence do you put in, you know, the histology piece? How much credence do you put in the AB blood typing piece? And how much credence do you put in the DNA? Um, and then I think that where you fall on whether you accept or reject these Eucharistic miracles is going to more or less be a product of the credences that you place in those three categories. Cool. Okay. That was my whole summary of the whole debate. And I think that I said it in a way where Matthew would agree with it. Dale, do you think that I did an all right job there?
I think so. I think yeah, he definitely agrees on the things you said. Although with the AB, I'm not totally sure because I know he denied that basically he had his Egypt and Israel cases, and he said that look, it's actually not true that these bacteria necessarily. Oh, yeah, go ahead. You wanted
Oh,
to
no,
say
no. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Keep going.
no worries. So I do think he slightly disagreed and said it's not necessarily the case that it's equally probable that these bacteria are producing these AB antigens and stuff like that. So that's the only thing I might question. I think Matt would question. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, no, it does make sense. So I guess two things. The first would be that I picked an example from Dr. Serafini's book where he was looking at this like excavation of mummies in Israel or something. Um,
yeah,
and like over half of the mummies tested for AB blood type.
yeah,
Which, so I don't think that Matthew disagrees that it's a possibility. I just think that he thinks that it's unlikely.
right. That's what I was saying. It's not
Yeah,
equally probable.
yeah. Um, and I guess I just kind of disagree because like we know that these samples were contaminated. Like we know that they were handled by, at the very least, the priest who was not wearing gloves at that time. Um, we know that like in Pixla, for instance, it was the priest and the Eucharistic minister. So it's two people touching it. We also know that they were then placed into water, which is like, not a sterile environment. Um, so yeah, I guess, if I ever have another conversation about this specifically with Matthieu. We have future conversations planned just on different topics.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess I would like to push more into the AB blood typing thing with him. Because the way that I look at it is that like the actual assays, like the actual methods that are ran, um, haven't really changed a whole lot since the 70s. Like, yeah, we've gotten better at running them and stuff like that. But the actual like mechanism by which we're detecting the presence of anti A and anti B, it's unchanged.
Hmm.
So I guess I'm not sure. And Dr. Kearse and Dr. Serafini have kind of written papers back and forth to each other
Mhm.
about this. And what's interesting is that Dr. Serafini's first response to Dr. Kearse's first paper, where he raised this concern, was more or less just like a, hey, please don't harsh my vibe. We need to excite people about Eucharistic miracles so that this gets studied more.
Ah,
Which I kind of thought was like, oh, like very interesting. And then Dr. Kearse wrote a response to that paper saying, hey, I get the concern. You're right. We do need to study this more. And my goal is certainly not to harsh the vibe, dude. But my goal is to prevent like scandal.
mhm.
And if we over exaggerate these claims and then we find out that they're wrong, we're never going to look into the future ones because we're going to
Mhm.
be like, no, we already know how this goes. We're going to get all excited and then it's nothing. No, instead, we need to be very prudent um, and be rigorous with all of them.
Yeah. And I
So,
assume
yeah,
those, because I didn't know about those papers. I assume they're like open access. I'll be able to download them and post them up or something like that. Okay, good.
yes, I
Okay.
mentioned them very, very briefly in my opening statement, right at the end. Um, and I have them all. I can send them all to you, and you can
Awesome.
just like link to them in the description and all that.
Sounds great. Sounds okay. Okay. So I know I promised you we were going to get into the specifics, but I do have one more general point, and it was actually this is another really important point. So I kind of mentioned, even though my bias, I'm with you, Kevin. I don't want to hear that Eucharistic miracles are true. But being an objective, fair, impartial thing, I did think that Matt won the debate, and the first reason was just stylistic. The format favored him, and that's not a reflection on you. This one is a reflection on you. It's substantive, and I think it comes in because you're such a nice guy. You're not trying to win points, but basically Matt framed, look, there if you're a skeptic, there are two alternatives. There's the misinterpretation and there's a fraud. And at one point during the debate, you took the fraud hypothesis totally off and you said in none of the cases do I think there's fraud. And I think that really hurt you because Matt's right. Misidentification, I don't think can explain all of the data that we have for all five of the cases. So that's why substantively, I think you really messed up there by taking away fraud as even an option in any case or to do. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I mean, to be clear, I don't think that I have any positive evidence of fraud. Um, what I do have evidence for is like bad scientific practice, like testing into compliance.
Mhm.
Um, and we can something I wouldn't mind getting into you with a little bit about is do you know anything about Katia Rivas? She's
Just
a
from what you guys were
okay.
talking about, so she's some false mystic or something, apparently. And
Is she false or is she not false? That's up to you to
oh,
judge.
well, I thought Matt was agreeing with you because I've never heard of
He
this person, so I have
I
no idea.
pressed him on it and he said he doesn't know. He's like, I don't know. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. Because I actually had that as like a question for him prior to seeing his opening. And then in his opening, he refers to uh the false mystic, Katia Rivas. And so I said, like, oh, so like, do you think that she's legitimately a false? And he said, no, 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 that was me putting on the voice of the skeptic here. I'm not saying that she is false. I'm not
Oh,
saying that she's real either,
okay, yeah.
but I'm just kind of withholding judgment on Katia Rivas. That was Matthew's point. Um, and maybe Matthieu would like to correct me. Maybe I'll ask him after this, and then when this video comes out, I can leave a comment. But if I recall correctly, he said he doesn't know if Katia is authentic or not, and he's not going to make a judgment right now either way.
Yeah, and he did provide a substantive counter as well. He's like, let's assume she is a fraud. The data is the data. Is the data fraudulent? And you would have said no, right? So
Yes, I agree. Here's why I brought up Katia Rivas, though. So the same Katia Rivas case is the testing into compliance case. So what happens is we get this paranormal investigator. People like to refer to him as like a medical professional. He was a paranormal investigator, Dr. Ricardo Castellan Gomez, and he meets this mystic woman who tells him. So Jesus like speaks through her, and so Jesus told him, Dr. Castellan Gomez, through Katia, hey, you have a special mission to prove that the Eucharistic miracle at Buenos Aires is correct. And through your investigation, you're going to bring respect back to the Catholic Church, and you're going to inspire like a whole generation of new believers. Um, whew, man, imagine hearing that, right? Like, how great would that be if Jesus himself told you that you're going to bring respect back to his church? So I think that Dr. Castellan Gomez was highly motivated to make the data again look as good as possible.
Yeah.
The data didn't look that good, in all honesty. The best thing going for these Eucharistic miracles is not data. It is not quantitative, right? It is qualitative. But even then, for this case, he sent it to one scientist and they said no known morphology. That's just him saying, like, this doesn't look like it's not part of any human body. They sent it to another guy. They're like, maybe it's skin cells. Sent it to a third guy, maybe it's skin cells. Sent it to another guy, maybe it's skin cells. Sent it to a fourth guy, maybe it's like muscle. And then they sent it to the guy who did the Eucharistic miracle from Lanciano 20 years prior, which is like, why are you sending it to him? You know? and then they sent it to a guy who had just written a book on the Shroud of Turin. And you're like, why are you sending it to him? But anyway, finally, the guy who wrote the Shroud of Turin said, yep, it's heart tissue. By the way, he was not a histologist, he was a medical examiner. Which he still looks at histology slides. So that's not a slight. It's just like, he was a medical examiner. It is different. Again, not that means he doesn't know what he's talking about. But it's just different. And so I think that that's pretty clear evidence of testing into compliance. Is that fraud? No, I don't think so. I don't think that counts as fraud. Fraud to me would be like switching out the slide, being like, I'm going to send you a slide from the Eucharistic miracle, and then you send him a legitimate slide that is actually human heart tissue. That would be fraud.
Let me ask this. I guess the way I would determine, and again, this is a follow-up. I do want to get to the specific cases because I have an example. Before you conceded about the fraud hypothesis, I was going to criticize Matthieu and say that he's presenting us with a false dilemma. But the thing I just want to, with the fraud thing, I would consider testing into compliance fraud if was he honest from the beginning? Did he say, look, I took it to 6 scientists and they got these results, and then on the 7th try I got this? Was he upfront? If he wasn't, then that's fraud. That's lying and deceit, in my opinion.
So here's the thing. He doesn't publish his results. Dr. Castellan Gomez. He doesn't publish anything in peer-reviewed journal articles. He doesn't publish anything anywhere.
Well, how does it get out there?
He makes PowerPoint presentations that he presents to local bishops, and then the local bishops say, approved. This is a good miracle that, well, they generally won't call it a miracle. They'll say that this is like an event that is worthy of like reflection and prayer and stuff like that. That's what the bishops will say. And then that's it. And then years later, he'll write a popular level book in Spanish for the most part. And in the popular level book, he'll include stories of his investigation. And he'll include in like an appendix, like pictures or maybe like a photocopy of like a report. So for instance, like the Dr. Ziguba signature is included in the back of one of his books that I own. I forget the name of that book. That might be like Ver y Crier or something like that, but doesn't matter. Then that's it. He just publishes in, like, he does PowerPoints for local bishops, and then he releases popular level books.
So that's fine as long as he includes in those popular level presentations, he's honest about the history, the entire history.
He does not include the entire history.
And that's fraud in my books. I wouldn't be as generous as you, but yeah, okay. Fair enough. All right. Well, let's get into the specifics then, because the first miracle is Lanciano. And this is one where I think fraud is the answer, but not the type of fraud that Matt presents us with. There's another type that he doesn't even offer as an option.
I think I agree. I think I know where you're going.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to play these video clips. If it's too time consuming, then maybe we'll stop. But I just want to see if I can play the clips of Matt giving the case for each one. I was trying to find Zugaby's letter there, but okay. So this is Lanciano, the first Eucharistic miracle.
The first case is Lanciano. Lanciano is a city in Italy. In the 8th century, approximately towards the year 750, there has been a report that a priest who did not believe in the real presence of Christ, who had some doubts on the subject, during a mass after the consecration, the host turned into flesh and blood, and he showed it to the entire church. Everyone was screaming it was a miracle, and this beautiful sign has been kept in Lanciano since then. You can see it still today. And so in 1970, the scientific analysis wanted to confirm if it was or not a miracle. And so Dr. Edoardo Linoli, who is a professor of anatomy, histology, and clinical microscopy, and who was also the head of service at the hospital of Arezzo in Italy, was called by the Vatican and the Franciscan friars to start his investigation on November 18, 1970. And so he took some samples and went to his laboratory to study what this was from a scientific perspective.
Celebrate with savings at the Great Canadian Super Sale at Canadian Tire. Save up to 40% on favorites
I like your Canadian
backyard, campsite, and more until June 25th.
Sorry about that.
And so this article can be found on PubMed Medicine, where
it's a quality medical.
The miraculous flesh is real human flesh composed of striated muscle tissue from the myocardium. So the myocardium, for those who don't know, is a part of the heart. It's a specific part of the human heart. Secondly, the miraculous blood that they found in Lanciano, in the relic of Lanciano, was shown to be real human blood, and this was shown through the chromatographic analysis. And thirdly, immunological studies showed that both the flesh and the blood were not only of human nature, but also belong to the group AB, both the flesh and the blood. And we will see later that AB is the rarest blood group on Earth. Fourthly, the proteins in the blood were normally distributed just like in fresh normal blood. So Linoli could compare the proteins in normal blood and the proteins that they found in the blood of Lanciano. And Linoli found no histological section that revealed any trace of preservatives previously used for embalming. So nothing was used to preserve the host throughout the years, because this was a host from the Middle Ages, and there was no thing that to preserve it like they do with Egyptian mummies.
Okay, so the conclusion slides, yeah, I think I could fit this in, but okay, so this Lanciano, I'll give my take first on it, and then I can turn it to you. But so in the first place, the historical evidence, Matt seems to be just kind of taking it at face value and to try and rule out fraud. Like, see, it happened in front of everybody. But as you point out, our earliest sources are from the 16th century. The testimony of the original miracle dating back to 750 AD is not reliable or proven to be reliable or something like that. So I don't think any of the historical info can be used to pronounce on was it fraud or not, or what happened. It's just a very late legend kind of thing. So the historical thing is a failure. There was two other points that I wanted to. The fraud. So I think that fraud was taking place here, but not necessarily with the science. Not let's pretend all of the science is sound. And I think I would agree with that, because even you said on the science front, this is the best case, which surprised me. Lanciano, you said, Kevin, that this is the best case. But look, there's obvious potential for fraud over the century or decades prior to people could have swapped out a sample of whatever it was and put in samples of heart tissue. And like we have reports of them doing this in the Renaissance period and similar stuff like this, or filling up, using duck's blood to trick people. So like the potential for fraud is not necessarily with Dr. Lannoli, but it's with people switching out samples at any time before it was taken and studied. Um, so that's the fraud issue, I think, is an equally probable explanation for the Lanciano thing. And then yeah, I have a third point that I want to ask you about, but first I'll just get your take, Kevin, on those first 2 points that I raised. What's your take on the Lanciano here?
Total agreement. Total agreement. Yeah, I the way that I interpreted Matthew's question was like, do we think that there's any fraud going on with regards to the work that Dr. Lannoli did? And my answer is no, I don't think so. But you're right. From the 8th century until now, I mean, we're talking well over 1,000 years. And even from the 16th century till now, we're talking well over or 500 years or whatever. And yeah, I mean, the 16th century was a time where, I mean, there's that famous quote. I'm calling it a famous quote. And I don't remember who said it. It was Martin Luther or Calvin or someone said that there are enough shards of the one true cross that you could, build like 1,000 crosses out. I forget exactly what he says. Or you could build a whole house out of it or something like that. And like, yeah, I held one. I remember being in high school and we all gathered in my grandparents' house, me and all my cousins and siblings. And we passed around a relic of the true cross. And we all thought it was indeed a relic of the true cross. And I'm sure that my family donated money to whoever let them hold it. I'm sure. I don't know that. But the point is, we know that people were creating these fake relics. There's like the breast milk of the Virgin Mary was a relic. This one's particularly gross. But there are relics of Jesus's foreskin. There were multiples of those floating around in the Middle Ages. Yeah. I mean, how silly is this? So all that to say, it would not surprise me at all if in the 16th century somebody, grabbed some pig's heart or something, or maybe even a human heart, and was like, they put it in. Look what happened to the host; it turned into this lob of flesh, and then it got preserved in the monastery at Lanciano until modern day when it was tested.
I'm just curious, with Lanciano, has there ever been any attempt scientifically to determine the age of the contents? No.
No new work has been done since 1971. There was a second report that was released in 1981, something like that.
1981.
Yeah, but that was just the re-review. That was like there wasn't new experiments being done. There were no new samples taken.
Well, Matt said that there were new experiments, but they were taken on unused.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I understand.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's it then. But even in 1981, I don't think that there was appetite for radiocarbon dating. It's a lot easier to do today. There's no reason why we couldn't do it today, but I give them a pass for not having done it in 1971 and 1981. I'm not mad at them for not having done radiocarbon dating back then. It was much more expensive back then. It was much less widely available than it is today. But you're right. We absolutely could radiocarbon date it today. And I think we should. I think that'd be awesome. Yeah. That would settle the debate for how old this tissue is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It would put new life into the historical argument, at least, kind of thing. But okay, now I was trying vigorously searching my notes because I thought with Lanciano, Matt made a point as to why it couldn't proof that it couldn't be fraud or something. But I'm not sure if it's Lanciano, but it was his point about the way it was cut was too clean, so that it would have been impossible for someone in the medieval ages to do that as a fraud, or in the 16th century. Do you know what I'm talking about there? Because I couldn't find it in my notes. But
he made points about how at Tixla, the intertwining of the bread and the flesh it's too interwoven into one another for it to have been placed there, like as if somebody fraudulently just put a little piece of heart tissue on top of a piece of bread, because of the intertwining. But that was Tixla, Mexico, in 2006. That wasn't Lanciano. Um,
Yeah, that's not what I have in mind. It was something else. Maybe it came up in the Q&A and I'm just not seeing it in my notes. I'll search for it.
okay.
But the next one, while you're talking, let's go to the next miracle, or set of miracles. This is Buenos Aires, and
Mhm.
on this front, this is where I think you excelled. You convinced me that I don't think there's anything miraculous going on with these Buenos Aires alleged miracles. So, with that said, let me just play the summary of the facts from Matt, and then I'll get you to comment while I ferociously try and find my notes there. But okay, so
Sounds good.
this is Matt giving his summary.
With two priests, Leopold Roque and Father Raito. Two nuns were helping to distribute the communion. Suddenly, Sister Areli Marokin, one of the two nuns, turned pale and rushed back towards the altar in tears. And why? Because she showed Father Raito in the ciborium that a host had become suddenly stained with blood. So you can see the host stained with blood on the pictures on the right here. And Father Raito saw it and he exclaimed out loud, "Oh, it's a miracle!" And he showed the congregation the host. And so here are more clear
Am I in the
pictures of the
right
Tixla
place?
miracle.
Is this Tixla or I might have gone too far? Bloody heck. Okay. All right. I'll just play it from here. This is Zuggabees.
I used the ginger trick because I was over 220 and now I can't stop melting.
And while refining their investigation, Dr. Gomez's team continued to show the samples to several other scientists in the subsequent month and years. In Australia, they go see Dr. Peter Ellis from the University of Sydney, Dr. Thomas Loy, Dr. John Walker from Sydney, and they also asked for Professor Linoli's opinion, who studied the host from Lanciano. He was also asked what he thought about it. So on the right, you can see he looks at the pictures of the sample. He did not look at it under the microscope, but he still had the microscopic pictures taken. And according to him, it looked like heart muscle. But the team wanted to have a final conclusion to be definitive, and therefore they turned to Professor Frederick Zugibe, who was the chief medical examiner and cardiologist at the time at Columbia University in New York. And so why him? Well, because he was perhaps the world leading expert in cardiology at the time, and he had 30 years of experience, numerous scientific publications, and over 10,000 autopsies to his name. So he was really a world expert in his domain, and that's why they went to him. So they sent him a picture by email. See the picture on the top. They say, "Dear Dr. Zugibe, can we have a meeting so that you can tell us what this is?" And so Dr. Zugibe said yes, and they met on April 20th, 2004. Tesoriero was filming the meeting, and Wilsey was interviewing Zugibe. And so Zugibe did not know where the sample came from. He just had this sample shown to him with the date of the sample, but no identification of the sample. So we could call it blind testing. And if you want to see Zugibe's reaction to this, go to Reason to Believe, and you can see at 8 minutes his reaction, his live reaction under the microscope, where he comments what he's seeing. And so this is what he's seeing under the microscope, and directly states, while looking at it under the microscope, "I am a heart expert. The heart is my business. This is flesh. This flesh is heart muscle tissue, myocardium from the left ventricle, not far from a valvular area. It is the muscle that gives the heart its beat and the body its life. This heart muscle is inflamed. It has lost its striation and is infiltrated with white blood cells. White blood cells are not normally found in heart tissue. These cells are produced by the body and they escape from blood and infiltrate the tissue to address trauma or injury. The heart of the person from which this tissue has come has been injured and has suffered trauma. The blood supplies to this heart has been compromised, resulting in necrosis, the destruction of part of the heart muscle. This heart has suffered. This is not unlike what I see in motor vehicle accident cases when CPR is applied to a person too harshly and the heart suffers injury. It is also the sort of suffering that I see in cases where someone has been severely beaten around the chest." And so
Okay, so I think that good enough for Matt's clip there. But yeah, Kevin, I'll turn it to you to give your take while I try to find something.
Yeah, something that we didn't get into very much. I think I only like briefly hinted at this during the actual conversation part was that so Matthew made a big deal about 10,000 autopsies. And you'll notice that earlier I was talking about histologists and medical examiners. So just for the audience, histology is like looking at muscle tissue on like prepared slides. And medical examiners aren't always doing that. Just now, I just Googled how often is heart histology done during an autopsy. And the AI overview is saying that heart histology is not routinely performed during autopsy. Um, so the whole thing about like him being beaten around the chest to me is like really silly. If somebody was beaten around the chest, you wouldn't be doing a heart histology. Gross autopsy would be plenty to determine cause of death. Like, if somebody has a caved in chest, then you can see that somebody caved in their chest with some kind of weapon. Like, you're not doing histology to look at slides. This is why I find the whole quantitative versus qualitative thing so important, because all that Dr. Zuckerberg did was look at some slides. Interestingly, he looked at a different sample than everyone else. That's something that like people don't talk about. Again, I'm not implying fraud. I'm really not. But it's just interesting to note he looked at a different sample than everyone else. And also, there's this whole weird thing where Zuckerberg's widow, to this day, insists that Zuckerberg did not believe in Buenos Aires. To the point where she like stood up during like a presentation and said, like, please don't use my husband's name like this. We don't sign off on this. But at the same time, we have this signed report that Dr. Castellan Gomez, the paranormal investigator, included in the back of one of his books. And it's signed by Dr. Zugaba. And Dr. Zugaba is like, yeah, this comes from this is human heart tissue. So like all that we have is what we have. And so, we have to go with that. But the whole thing is very strange. It's all very weird. But yeah, he's a medical examiner, not a histologist, which again, that's not to say he never looks at heart tissue under slides. I'm sure he does. I'm sure that he did that for at least many of the 10,000 autopsies that he did. Like, I'm sure that for at least 100 of those 10,000, he looked at heart he looked at heart histological slides. I'm sure. But again, like, I don't know what 10,000 autopsies really has to do with anything. He's not a histologist. He wasn't a histologist.
I thought that was a really good point that you raised during the debate. That was something where I was kind of like, yeah, he was kind of one thing he said as his counter. Again, I kind of sided with you on that specific point, but I remember there was this issue of I think it was you that quoted no, it was him that quoted Franco Serafini talking about the example of the pilot with experience, 30-year pilot. If somebody mistook heart tissue for bacteria, that would be the equivalent of a pilot mistaking a runway for a potato field. And he's just saying all these scientists, that it is implausible that they would all engage in misidentification. I agree with him on that point, that look, regardless, is it skin or not, that's not bacteria. So I guess that's my question for you is like, what do you make of his counter there, that even if they were mistaken and coming to different conclusions, it's still organic tissue. It's not like some bacteria or fungi, right?
Oh, well, fungi is organic material.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, you know what I mean. Like, is it similar enough to what human?
Have you ever looked at? You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I guarantee you. Now, obviously, you're not a heart expert, and neither am I. But particularly when they're stained the same way. So people don't talk about this enough with regards to Eucharistic miracles, but when a histological slide is prepared. So first of all, what is a slide? Like, what, I use this word all the time, and sometimes I forget that like not everyone works in pharma. When scientists want to look at a piece of flesh under the microscope, they don't just like grab a piece of flesh and like just plop it onto a piece of glass and then look at it. No. They're not going to see anything. They have to stain the slide. So they take the tissue and they put a drop of stain onto it. And that stain is going to highlight certain areas. There are different kinds of stains that you use for different purposes. The most common stains are eosin and something with an H that I forget the name of. But this is how these slides were prepared. They were prepared as if they were human tissue, like human organic tissue.
And
if you
your
want.
point, sorry to interrupt, your point that I think was a good one is that these tests are insufficient to determine human tissue.
They're not even tests. Like it's just people looking at pictures and being like, "Yep, looks like human tissue to me." So again, like they're not even tests. You know,
Okay.
that's
Okay.
the bad part.
So what Matt, and again, I admit my total ignorance on here. So, but you're saying your expertise, because you do work in the pharma field, so you would at least know enough to know that there is no way to distinguish bacteria from damaged heart tissue or muscle or human epidermis or something like that, right? Skin.
I'm not gonna say that there's no way to know. Um, but I will say that they are supposed to be prepared differently,
Okay.
and nobody would ever. So if we found like a little blob of bloody organ on the ground and we wanted to know what organ this was, we would not just make a slide of it and show it to somebody and be like, what organ does this look like? No, there are specific biomarkers that we would look for that reveal what part. These again, this is the difference between quantitative and qualitative. Um,
So
and
I
so
just want people to see what we're talking. So the stains are what are turning these things purple.
yeah,
And that's what they're identifying. Oh, see, this is human tissue, but you're saying we wouldn't know enough. Like this could be purple stained bacteria cells. Like these stains would equally operate the same way. Is
no, what I'm saying is we might not be able to see any of the fungal cells or bacteria because they weren't stained. They might kind of just
oh,
like be invisible on this
gotcha.
slide. Um, and as far as I'm aware, for all of them except for like except for like Nika, um, nobody even tried to look for fungus. Um, so to me, that's kind of concerning that like nobody even tried to look.
That makes
Um,
sense. Yeah.
yeah.
What
Um,
about the okay, so one thing that really gets me is the issue of the white blood cells because Frederick, this is kind of a qualitative thing, but he is saying he's seen white blood cells that are active, and that would be impossible beyond a few hours before. And this is in his letter and stuff like that. So, like, that I think does speak against the fraud hypothesis, or if fraud took place, like a swapping out of the samples, it would have had to have taken place like a few hours before um, they gave it to Zugby. And if that's the case, I don't know how long it took them to get from the church to Zugby's office, but wouldn't that also rule out human contamination? Remember, you were saying, well, the bishop didn't have gloves on. Well, if it took them more than a few hours to get to Zugby's office, that wouldn't be an issue with these white blood cells, at least. Does that make sense, or am I just asking stupid questions?
so I don't believe that Zugoba was saying that he sees still alive white blood cells. I think that he said that he saw recently, like these white blood cells look like they were alive like a few hours ago, right? Can we pull up the letter again? I want to. Do
Yep,
we have it?
I'm gonna go to it right now because I have that's
Perfect.
one of my questions that I didn't think Matt. I was surprised you didn't raise it, but yeah. Anyways, go ahead and say what you want to say first, and then
Does he
I'll.
mention the white blood cells in the actual letter?
Yep, white blood cells primarily polymorphonuclear leukocytes. You see that?
Yeah, I see it. He just doesn't mention. Let me look up what polymorph because I don't actually know what that word means. Let me look up that word. Poly. Oh, I lost. Polymorphonuclear. Polymorphonuclear leukocytes. It's just a type of white blood cell. Yeah, he doesn't say here what exactly he's seeing. Um, I recall other scientists, I don't recall if it's Zuckerberg or not, claim to have seen what looks like recently deceased white blood cells, which would still be incredible if those white blood cells had been alive 1 hour before Zuckerberg saw them. Like that would still be insane. Now, what I think that just is it's just you're not that's actually not a white blood cell. Like you think it is, but it's not. Um, and I mean, we all agree that plenty of these scientists have made mistakes because like all of the actual histologists didn't mention white blood cells. One of them said no known morphological characteristics. I mean, like that to me, the first one saying absolutely like this looks like nothing, and that one was set to like an actual lab, not just some scientist, you know.
Yeah.
That to
Yeah.
me is kind of
I think, yeah, like I said, the Buenos Aires was the case where you really excelled and convinced me because look at his Matt's case was kind of like, look, well, all these experts, we have a scholarly consensus, they all couldn't be wrong, but they all were kind of wrong, right? And I know he says, well, that's because they weren't actually an expert, but I liked your counter saying, well, look, in histology, they had the skills sufficient to make the determination, and they just didn't.
why did we send them to 5 non-experts in a row? You know, like I'm positive that if Dr. Castagnan Gomez got the answer he wanted to on the first one,
Mhm.
we wouldn't be hearing about how, oh no, those 5 were not experts. Dr. Zugaba is the only expert. It's very convenient that it took them 7 tries, you know, to get it right, and the 7th one was actually the expert secretly all along.
What
Like
what's your
no nonsense.
what is your take? Because I know Matt countered that, and I'm not sure if you responded or not to it, or if you moved on. But he said, "Well, yeah, but they're experts in looking at healthy heart tissue, but not damaged heart tissue, and that's why they couldn't determine it, whereas Zugabe could." Do you know, like, would that actually make that much of a difference?
Well, it's
Or
just not true because the first lab that they sent it to was also like a medical examiner, just like Zugaba. The first lab, the one in California, um, it's like a lab that like police departments would send samples to, if they're trying to like solve a case. Which, by the way, that's what Zugaba does. Like Zugaba is a medical examiner. He looks at dead bodies. Um, and that was the first lab that they sent it to. So it's just not true that like Zugaba wasn't even the first like medical examiner. Um,
hmm, got
so
it.
yeah, it's just yeah.
All right. So here is, I think, the knockdown point that you didn't raise in the debate, and I was hoping you would because I wanted to hear how Matt would have responded. But it's the fact that look, the if this is a Eucharistic miracle, it's funny that God is contradicting what happened to Jesus in the Gospels because Zugabe says these degenerative changes are consistent with a recent myocardial infarction
Infarction, yeah.
of a few days duration. So this damage was happening to him a few days before he died due to an obstruction of a coronary artery that supplies nutrients and oxygen to an area of the heart muscle. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but reading the Gospels, Jesus' torture began the night before he was crucified, not a few days before. So, did Jesus just randomly have a heart attack? Maybe the crowds welcoming him on Palm Sunday shocked him so much he had a heart attack or something. Um, I'm
Um,
just kind of curious. I wish Matt was here because I would want to hear how he would. This isn't Jesus. Whoever this heart is, it's not consistent with what we see of Jesus' torture in the Gospels, right?
um, I want to try to answer for Matthew because him and I might be united on this one.
Okay.
Well, actually, I don't know. Let me not put words into Matthew's mouth. That's not fair of me. Let me just give you my answer though. You simply can't tell this kind of thing from looking at a slide. It's preposterous to think that you can look at a slide and then be like, "Oh, yep, there was a heart attack 3 days prior to death." Are you serious? You're like reading tarot cards now. This is preposterous. This is not how real science is done. Um, this entire report to me is very, very silly. Um, Nobody looks at a single histology slide and then says, "Yep, there was a heart attack a few days prior to death. Also, it kind of looks like you were beat around the chest with something." No, you can't tell that. This is this is like those pseudoscience quacks who will like tell you to like put like a potato peel. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but like put like a potato peel in your sock, and if the potato turns black, that's because you have toxins in your body or something.
Hmm.
Like, no, that's simply not how this works. Likewise, this is simply not how this works. You don't look at a slide, a histology slide, and then be like, "Yep, there was a heart attack," especially not one as small as what we gave Dr. Zugaba. So yeah, the whole thing is just very silly.
Well,
Um,
the only thing I would say is that Matt can't say that because that literally contradicts his
right.
entire case, right? He's saying, look, Zugby is the expert specifically with these types of changes that the other experts weren't expert enough to notice. So I can't picture like if you're Matt or you're supporting the Eucharistic miracle side, you can't resort to, oh, but actually the Zugby screwed up here and you really can't see that. He just made all this up. Well, I could just say the same thing about everything then. Like, how does he know there's white blood cells and stuff? So I'm not sure like Matt or a pro Eucharistic miracle person could answer the way you just did. Like that's
You're
kind of
right.
game away, right?
You're right. I definitely spoke. That was 100% Kevin there and not Matthew. I'm sure that Matthew would say something to the effect of, um, he made a mistake about like the heart attack, but it's very different to say that he didn't know that it was muscle tissue. Like, so he got the heart attack part wrong or the timing of the heart attack wrong or something, but he could still tell that it was heart tissue. I'm sure that would be, and I'm definitely not doing his answer justice, but I'm sure it would be something like that. Like, oh, well, the heart attack piece is different, but the basics is telling what kind of tissue it is, and then whether or not there was a heart attack, that's advanced. So he made a mistake on the advanced part, but he got the basics right. I'm sure that's something like what Matthew would say.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think that covers everything with Buenos Aires. Is there anything else? Because I know this is the most involved one. Before,
Yeah,
yeah.
just like a high level thing about Buenos Aires is that the most stuff was released about Buenos Aires. Also, after Buenos Aires, we have Tixla, Sokolka, Legnica, and those were a lot more hushed, which I think is very interesting. And when I say hushed, I mean like even like obviously for Buenos Aires, nothing was actually like no papers came of this, nothing was peer reviewed. Um, but I think that like to some degree, we were at least trying with Buenos Aires
Hmm.
to do good science, and then if this is going to be really harsh, but I think it's interesting to watch throughout time the transparency disappear because as we the 70s was great, the 90s still doing good, but like we're not publishing it. The Lanciano was published in a journal. Now it was a college journal that like it was his own personal journal, so it's not like
Yeah.
regardless. We kind of watch this. Um, Things are getting less and less transparent over time, uh, and that to me is a concerning sign. Um, so there is like I have a lot to say about Buenos Aires because there is data about Buenos Aires to talk about. There's just less to talk about as time goes on because they released less and less information. This is particularly true in Sokolka and Legnica. Virtually nothing is released about those. Virtually no testing was done for those. So there is just less to say about those because there's less transparency, which is, and again, this kind of comes back to that methodology thing. If you have the method in place, then we don't have to worry about these transparency concerns. But because there is no method in place, these people can be as transparent or as non-transparent as they would like, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to Tixla then, and let's see because Matt provides with this one a reason why it would be impossible for fraud kind of thing. So let me just play that clip. Hopefully you're not running out of time yet, right?
Nope, we're good.
All right.
People were participating in a weekend, a spiritual retreat with two priests, Leopold Roque and Father Raito. Two nuns were helping to distribute the communion. Suddenly, Sister Arely Marokin, one of the two nuns, turned pale and rushed back towards the altar in tears. And why? Because she showed Father Raito in the ciborium that a host had become suddenly stained with blood. So you can see the host stained with blood on the pictures on the right here. And Father Raito saw it and he exclaimed out loud, "Oh, it's a miracle." And he showed the congregation the host. And so here are more clear pictures of the Tixla miracle filmed on the day it happened. And in the following weeks, Bishop Alejo Zavala Castro, who was the bishop of the diocese at the time, decides to set up a commission of inquiry. And it is based firstly on 17 sworn testimony made by different people, all in agreement, who said they saw the miracle in the church. And 3 years later, the scientific investigation was launched by Ricardo Castañón Gomez and his association, Grupo Internacional para la Paz, because they pay for the scientific investigation. Not naive, but also somewhat skeptical. So this rejoins what I said without evidence, but he's somewhat skeptical, but he's willing to go ahead and try this scientific investigations. And so while he remained open to supernatural, the cardiologist at the Nuevo Hospital in Colombia stated that the person to whom the heart belonged had undergone a heart attack or significant physiological stress. And the laboratory GeneX in La Paz in Bolivia notably confirmed the presence of hemoglobin, a protein found only in red blood cells. And finally, the blood group was AB, the same as the one on the host of Lanciano, and this was confirmed by two separate laboratories. One is the Corporativo Médico Legal in Mexico, and the second is the GeneX laboratory in Bolivia, and both demonstrated through immunohistofluorescence the presence of the antigens A and B in the examined tissues. And finally, the GeneX laboratory also determined for the first time the RH, the negativity of the RH of the sample. And so this is the first time it happened in Eucharistic miracles. And
okay, so I'll just keep that summary up for the audience as you go through it. But one thing that he mentions later on, and I'll just mention it here to save time, is he rules out look, this has to be a supernatural thing. Even with today's technology, it would be impossible to commit fraud because the blood was proven to be coming from within the host, and it's a very thin, like less than a millimeter thick host or bread thing that Catholics use. So yeah, that first of all, I just want to get your take on these claims in general, but like, what do you make of Matt's claim? Because I don't think you responded to this in the debate, that the blood was proven to be coming from within the host, and that necessarily entails some kind of supernatural origin for this blood or whatever it is, even if it's not, even if you dispute that it's blood, some kind of red substance coming from within. That's not a bacterial or natural fungi or contamination.
I mean, I guess I just disagree largely there. We would expect it to look like it was coming from within if it was fungal growth. So that just to me kind of is, yeah, the coming from within thing, like the call was coming from the inside. That to me kind of seems like it's like, well, this is evidence that comports with blood welling up from inside supernaturally. But it also seems to comport with the idea that this is fungus that is growing from the host.
Do you know how did they make that determination? Because I'd never heard that before. So what is it they're doing to determine it's coming from within as opposed to just on the outer surface? Like, do they cut it?
No studies were published. We don't know.
So it's just a non-evidenced claim or testimony, I guess, from what's his name, Gonmonez or
Ricardo Castellano Gomez. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is going to be coming from so like, we can like look at Dr. Serafini's works cited. And oh yeah, so Crónica de un Milagro Eucharístico, Chronicles of a Eucharistic Miracle. That's a 2014 popular level Ricardo Castellano Gomez book. That's his first source cited for his chapter on Tixla. And then like a lot of this is like a lot of his other sources are like YouTube videos and like newspaper clippings and stuff like that. I spent a long time looking through the bibliographies to see if there were any kind of papers that I could find, and there's simply none. So the problem that we're going to have with Tixla, and then with the further ones, especially like even worse than Tixla, is just that there's like not a whole lot that I can say in response other than like, sounds good. Would love to see a journal article about this, because there's just kind of nothing.
Outside of that, let me just ask hypothetically, could they determine that? Because he's saying there were two separate studies, one in 2009 by Dr. Lazo and in 2010 by Dr. Perez, where they used a high-powered digital microscope as well as ultraviolet lighting. Now, again, I'm not a scientist, so I have no idea. hypothetically, if they did this, would that be able to tell whether it's coming from within or from the surface of the host? Or, yeah, like, do you have any idea how these techniques would work in theory? And would it actually do what they say they are, or is this just nonsense?
Um, so I mean, I'm also not a scientist. My degree is in engineering, and I work in precision medicine operations. Keyword being operations. Like I'm not on the science side of things. I'm on the ops side of things. Um, so I don't want to say no. There's no way that they could tell that just by looking at it under a microscope and backlighting it. But like, I don't know how they would. Um, I don't know. I don't know how they would just look at it under a microscope, even with backlighting, and then say it's coming from within. I honestly don't know.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like they're saying there is an ongoing presence of fresh blood in the stained portion of the host underneath the coagulum. So the outer part was coagulated or something, and then they're saying there was fresh blood underneath. So I think that's how they're kind of assuming, oh yeah, well, as you keep going down, there's going to be a continuous fresh blood. I think that's what they're saying. But yeah, we just have no way to confirm whether this is true or not, apart from what these two guys are saying, I guess. So
Yeah, so much of this stuff is just Dr. Ricardo Castellan Gomez, the paranormal investigator who believes in psychic powers and stuff. He goes and he asks scientists, and then he tells us what the scientists said. And we're like, we just have to trust Dr. Ricardo Castellan Gomez, which, if I haven't made that clear, I do not. I think that this poor man was fooled into thinking that he was like Jesus personally told him that he was like destined to bring, respect back to the Catholic Church and stuff. So um I don't think that he's purposely fooling anybody. I think that he's fooling himself. Um but I just think that he's perfectly happy to test into compliance. Um and like we don't know what we don't know with regards to these Eucharistic miracles. So we don't know how often he tested Tixla into compliance either. Like how many different scientists did he send it to between 2006 and 2010 who didn't give him the answers that he wanted? We will simply never know. Um, yeah. So again, I'm going to struggle with a whole lot to say here, but that's just because there's, I guess there's not a ton to say.
all right, fair enough. Let me just if you know this last question on this one, let's pretend it is true for the sake of argument that there is something coming from within. Could that be explainable naturally in some way, like fungi or bacteria growing
Mhm.
from within or something? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's how the fungi would probably grow.
Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, we can move on to Solka then, and I'll play the clip.
Okay, so now let me talk to you about Sokolka. Sokolka is another independent Eucharistic miracle that occurred in Poland on October 12th, 2008. So this was during a mass, 8:30 mass in the morning in the Church of Saint Anthony of Padua, with Father Filip Zadrowski, who dropped a host without noticing. And he picked it up, but since it was dirty, he followed the standard procedure in the Catholic Church and placed it in a bowl of water, and then in the tabernacle to wait until it dissolved. But when they came back a week later on Sunday, October 19th at 8 a.m., the sacristan Julian Dubowska opened the tabernacle and found that the host was partially covered by a red-colored and found that the host was partially covered by a red substance, a coagulum-like substance. And so Sister Julia immediately called the priest in charge of the church, and the bishop was quickly informed and asked for the host to be secured. On January 7, 2009, so just a few months later, at the bishop's request, the host was removed from the white linen for further examination. And so you can see that the host was put on this cloth, the white cloth, and they took it off this white cloth and sent it to two experts So these two experts come from the Białystok University, and they were chosen to perform the examination. First, we have Stanislaw Sulowski, who is a renowned professor from the Department of General Pathomorphology. He has 286 publications recognized by PubMed, and he is an expert in immunohistochemistry of neoplastic tissues. Maria Zobaniak-Lotowska from the Department of Medical Pathomorphology also has 115 scientific publications on PubMed, and her main expertise lies in hepatology and pediatric gastroenterology. So we have two worldwide experts who knew that it came from a consecrated host because she was there when they took it from the host, but the professor Stanislaw Sulowski does not know anything of that, so he's doing totally a blind testing. And so both examined it independently in different rooms, and so they both came with the same conclusion that it is heart muscle, or at least a living organic structure that mostly resembles heart tissue, heart muscle. And they found that the fibers show centrally placed nuclei with segments and delicate microfibrillar formations with disintegration that showed a sign of suffering or damage. So a suffering myocardic tissue. And especially it was impossible to fake. So the heart muscle fibers and the substance of the host were intrinsically intertwined. So you can see on the pictures on the screen here that the degree of microscopic interpenetration cannot be manufactured by any kind of human instruments because you have the substance of the host that is intrinsically linked to the myocardic tissue. And so you cannot make these two linked with human instruments. So that's what convinced Dr. Lotowska that it was supernatural. So that's
Sokoka. Yeah, Kevin, obviously I'll let you give your take on this, but the part again that I'm most interested in, this impossible to fake thing, and you kind of briefly mentioned this before, but what is your response to this penetration? I know you kind of objected to it, that it's not proven and we have no peer review, we have none of this stuff, but Matt responded by saying, well, we do have this picture. How do you explain this observation where it looks like the tissue is intertwined with the blood?
To me, that looks like fungus that's eating the bread. That's just what it looks like to me.
Mhm.
And this like inextricable, this inextricable intertwining to me seems like it's just like a really poetic way of saying like, yeah, like the two substances are next to each other. That doesn't look like muscle tissue to me, just like looking at a picture. Now, obviously you'd want to look at it under a slide. But like, so here's where I will agree with Matthieu. And I think that when Matthieu talks about like impossible to fake, this is what he's imagining. So you have, the host, the Eucharist right here, and then somebody takes human heart tissue and they like place it on top and they smush it around and they smush it inside. And then they're like, oh, look, it's turning into heart tissue. Like that would be obvious. I agree. And I do not think that is what happened here. I do not think that anybody faked by trying to smush real human heart tissue in there. I don't think it's human heart tissue at all. I think it's fungus. I think the fungus is eating the bread. And that looks like fungus eating the bread to me.
So the reason why the fungus is so big is like this all used to be part of the bread, but it got all eaten up, and it's in the process of finishing it off. That's
yeah.
what you're saying?
And I mean, it might have grown past the bread too. I'm not saying that the host was that big, but I think that it ate the bread. Like that's what is happening in these cases. Like the fungus is growing on top of the bread because the bread is a food source.
Gotcha. Do you know, have there been any micro photographs of fungi eating something like bread where like we can see that it does kind of look similar to this level of intertwining? Or
I mean, I guess I don't know of any, but we could like people redo these experiments at home all the time. Dr. Kierst did, my friend Skeptasmic did. And like this is what they look like. We just would have to take it and then dry it out and put it on a piece of bread. I mean, put it on a piece of cloth. And then we could take a picture of it. So like we could do that experiment like ourselves at home. And I think we should. I think that'd be cool. Dr. Kierst has pictures of his at home Eucharistic miracle experiments.
Yeah.
that you can look at in his paper. He's got pictures of them. They don't look like that because he wasn't showing you it dried off on a cloth. He was showing you the still wet one, like in the bowl. But we could just dry it off and then take another picture. Um, and then there is another point that I would like to make about this, and
Yeah.
I think that focusing on the scientist instead of on the science is always a sure sign that something sketchy is going on. Whenever there's like a quack who wants to sell you his snake oil, he's going to talk about how I was a doctor for 20 years and now I'm selling my own supplement. And that's why you should. I don't care how long you were a scientist, dude. I care about the process of, I care about the scientific process. I care about peer review. I don't want to know who the scientists are, frankly. I want to send these samples to labs like PPD Central Lab, labs like Icon, like Thermo Fisher, like Q2, like IQVIA, like LabCorp. There's so many of these labs that we could, and these are all just the ones in the US, and none of these occurred in the US. But there's plenty of labs in Europe. There's plenty of labs in South America. And often these samples were sent to the US. So like that first lab for the Buenos Aires case was in the US, the one that said no known morphology. So I find the weird, like, look at this scientist, look how qualified they are, and this is what they said. To me, this is just simply not how science is done, and it kind of raises my skeptic hairs rise on end whenever people start talking about individual scientists instead of the scientific process, instead of the assay, right? The platform that a certain assay was run on or something. Like respectfully, I'm sure that Professor Lotowowska is super qualified, I'm sure. But I also know that she was working on canonization cases. So she was a friend of the bishop. So like, okay, why do we pick her? you know?
So
so
yeah. Well, yeah, I guess just to kind of counter, even in my own experience in philosophy, like for example, I applied to PhD programs, but I'm limited, right? So I could only apply to places in Toronto, or there's like if you had an online option, which most PhD programs do not offer. And because my area of specialization was philosophy of religion, I didn't want to like fake it and write, on some write as part of my application some topic that I'm not going to be caring about or getting stuck with. But the thing in academia, when you talk miracles, or if I wanted to do, proposed like the shroud, or what I submitted in the end was like either the shroud or like my theory of miracle identification. And everyone was telling me like, they're gonna probably just throw this in the garbage as soon as they see it. So like, and that's what happened in the end. But I felt compelled to try to get in and do what I felt passionate about, as best I could. But there is that bias, even among Christian philosophers. Like my class Cray is a Christian. He believes in miracles. He believes in all this stuff. But even I see that there's that bias in academia. So I'm just wondering, maybe it's a lack of choices. Like maybe no other scientists want. Oh, they hear about it. You want me to study a miracle? No, I'm not getting involved in that. So the only ones they could get are people that are like this. Do you think that could be a reason, or?
yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it has something to do with it. That being said, how many peer-reviewed journal articles have been written about the shroud? Like a
Yeah.
lot. So I'm sure that we could write peer-reviewed journal articles about these Eucharistic miracle cases. Like I'm sure that we could. Especially if we designed some kind of protocol where we were going to submit them alongside samples that are known to be like we inoculated a host with fungus and then we send that sample in and then alongside also a human heart sample.
Yeah.
And now we have, different labs looking at all three samples, right? And then we want to see if the individual labs can tell which sample is which and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like something like that. I'm sure there would be
It
journals that would publish something like that.
Yeah, it takes work. I'll give you the example in the Shroud, Applied Optics, right? Great journal and stuff like that. And they publish some of the STIRP papers and stuff. But even they, with Dr. Tom McAvoy, they had this bias too. They just wanted to ignore it. They kept him waiting for months. They promised him 3 peer reviewers and stuff like that because he had great science, and he went through kind of heck. Like he had to be persistent, stay, hey, you said you were going to review it, let's do this. And finally, after like 6 months, he finally got one person to review, a couple people to review it, and then they published it because the results were good. But yeah, I just wanted to point out there is this academic bias in peer review. It's not pure. They're not like they're not pure researchers and stuff. There's bias there.
No disagreement. But it's been a lot longer than 6 months for any of these Eucharistic miracles. I mean, it's been decades.
Yeah.
So I
Sure.
think that if people wanted to get them peer reviewed, they could have done so by now. I just don't think that there's an appetite for doing so. I don't think that Dr. Ricardo Castellan Gomez has any desire to do anything other than his pop level books.
And that's a shame on the other side. As you said, yeah, that when the bias is on the other side, look, don't get in the way of God's truth. Do we worship God or not? Let's get the truth. Let's do everything we can. Find out what the truth is. So whether that's the shroud, Eucharistic miracles, I am annoyed by like the hindrances because of people biases. So yeah, I get what you're saying. All right. Well, we have our last one, 2013. Let me share my screen. And that's okay. So just to summarize the results, so this is the Legnica, Poland Eucharistic miracle. And what they did is they had a microscopic examination, revealed again heart muscle with clear signs of damage and suffering under ultraviolet light with an orange filter. No idea why that mattered, but the images closely resemble those previously in Sulcoca. Histochemical testing, so that's quantitative testing, also reveals traces of human nuclear and mitochondrial DNA. Okay, but that could be the result of contamination. As Kevin said, we don't get any STRs or any full profiles or anything that everybody agrees on. And the histopathology department of the Faculty of Medicine announced that the striated muscle fiber fragments in cross-section were discovered in the histopathological images of the tissues. So, yeah, Kevin, what's your kind of general take on this? And then I have a question for you where Matt argues it's impossible to be fraud.
Yeah. I guess something that we haven't spoken about yet, and I want to kind of throw a bone to the pro side right now, is that there are, so throughout the kind of Eucharistic miracle history, Legnica included, there have been like actual blood chemistry and hematology tests performed that had results that make it look like it really is blood. These occurred at Lanciano, these occurred at Buenos Aires, these occurred at Legnica. And at each one of these, I want to say, hey, this is great. This is evidence on the side of there being real blood here. And that would be something astounding, right? If there was real blood there, that would be astounding. Now, other of those chemistry tests and hematology tests also came up negative. So I think it's important to kind of like look at all of the data and not just like certain cherry-picked results. But I think that Dr. Serafini does so in his book. And that's why you'll notice that Dr. Serafini and I shouldn't speak for Dr. Serafini, but my impression of Matthieu is that he really didn't stress the chemistry or the hematology, and especially not the DNA. For him, the big thing was the histology. Looking at the slides. And I think that if I was to like play devil's advocate, I would do the exact same thing. I would probably want to focus on the histology as well. So I do just kind of want to throw a bone and say like, yeah, like those positive chemistry and hematology tests and stuff like that. Like they did like hematocrit or something. They detected the presence of hemoglobin at both Buenos Aires and Lanciano, and maybe here too, I forget. But like, wow, that's incredible that you found that there's evidence that there is hemoglobin present. Like hemoglobin is like in blood, and like you don't find hemoglobin just like kind of randomly in the world, you know. So that's astounding. And I don't want to take that away from the pro side.
Yeah.
Well, now,
Oh, well, sorry, while you're talking, I'm just going to show you did a very good, helpful table showing like what were the tests for each of these miracles that they did or didn't do. So, yeah, I just wanted to show that to the audience as you were talking about the tests.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I think it was what I did here too is for the chemistry and hematology, I wrote like yes, no, no, yes. I'm just saying, was it done? I'm not even saying like, do the results confirm that this is indeed human blood? Because at almost all of them, I think the results were mixed. Like they would find hemoglobin via one method, and then they would try via another method and not find any hemoglobin. So is there hemoglobin there or is there not? The evidence seems to be inconsistent. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. It's too early to tell. Um, so yeah. What I think is strange is the lack of blood typing at Sokolka and Legnica. That seems to me to be like why not? Like that's super super easy. It makes me wonder if they did do it and they just didn't find anything, and they're like, oh, we tried to test the blood types, we didn't find A or B. I don't know. It wasn't peer reviewed, so I don't know if there's no evidence that they did any. But how would we know if they did? We
Yeah.
wouldn't. Um, Again, that's just speculation. I have no idea if they did or didn't. I think it's super weird that they didn't, um, especially because they did try to amplify the DNA at these and they couldn't. Um,
Exactly. Yeah,
um,
it's such a big thing. I'm shocked by Buenos Aires as well. Like I would have thought, well, I guess no, Buenos Aires makes sense because it was the second miracle and they just got the AB in Lanciano apparently. So maybe they didn't know like, oh, is it going to be consistent or not? They weren't thinking about it, I guess maybe. But with Legnica, once they had subsequent confirmation, there was definitely this claim about the AB blood, so they should have tested for it.
yeah, they absolutely should have. Which again makes me wonder if they did and then just didn't report it. We can't know. We can't. We cannot know because this was not never published anywhere. Who knows how much testing was performed at these and just kind of never reported. We can't know until we decide to actually get serious about this testing, um, which would be awesome if we did. I think that we should get serious about this testing. Um, Something that I like about like Nika is that apparently they did try to rule out fungal contamination here. Um, Let me see. I have the book open.
Because they had
Um,
control samples for this one, right?
yeah, I forget exactly how they tested for the presence of fungus. Um, let's see. The tissue was not made of bacteria. The bacteria that were present only represented a negligible local contamination. In particular, there was no bacteria known to produce coloring substances like Serrata maricens. Um, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is what they did here. They used silver stain, which is actually a stain that you use for fungus.
Hmm.
Um, so they did stain it looking for fungus, and they didn't find any. And
Oh,
that to me is huge. They should have done that at every other case, and they didn't. But they did at Lake Nika. So credit where credit is due to Lake Nika for actually using silver stain.
so
Um,
if it's not that, what else could that red stuff possibly be other than blood then? Like, do we have any ideas?
I mean, to be clear, I still think it's fungus. Um, they
Oh,
stained it with silver stain and they didn't see any, but they didn't actually like look for fungal DNA or anything like that. So
so the
if I was a betting man, I would still bet that it's fungus. Um,
So these staining tests are kind of inconclusive, just generally speaking. Like they're helpful guides, maybe, but they're not conclusive in and of themselves, it sounds like.
it's not even a test. It's just, hey, if we're going to look at this thing under a microscope, we have to prepare the slide for us to look at it. And if we stain it with the eosin and the whatever, then that's preparing it to look at like that's like the standard stains. But if you want to look at fungus or bacteria, you should use a silver stain. So it's like they weren't even looking for fungus when they were looking at most of the slides, but like Nika, they did specifically look for fungus. But what are they doing? Literally just looking at a slide. They're just looking at something under a microscope and being like, "Yep, I don't see any."
Is,
So
isn't the point of the stain. So I would consider that a test, right? Because they're saying, look, if it is a fungi, or maybe it's only certain types of fungi, if you use the silver stain, it will react and create a dyed image or something. So if you're using it, you don't get that. Isn't that kind of a test that it's not these types of fungi? Or
It's as much of a test as appearances in your analysis. Do you consider appearance to be a test? It's considered part of the urinalysis panel. So clearly people talk about it like it's a test, but it's qualitative, not quantitative. Um, and so I just place way more emphasis on the quantitative results. And
that's I'm a
yeah,
little bit confused then, because this would be quantitative to my mind. It's a chemical reaction that either takes place or doesn't. And if it would be expected, if it is this fungi, I'm assuming a scientific fact that it will chemically react in this way when subject to this stain. Or am I just miss
it'll dye the fungus so that it's very visible under a microscope, and then you look at it under a microscope and you're like, do I see any or do I not?
Okay.
And so that's it. I would much prefer something like, yeah, we took a DNA sample, and we didn't only look for human STRs. I mean, truthfully, these are so late, 2013 for like Nika. Why not just, this was only like 10 years ago. Why not just sequence the whole genome? Like, everyone before 2010 gets a break for not sequencing the whole genome. But like in 2013, we could have sequenced the genome. It's expensive, but we could do it. And then we'd be able to look at the DNA and be like, oh, we know exactly what this is. And I would love to see that moving forward for all Eucharistic miracles. With some regard, I think that we're already starting to do that. And my very last slide in the presentation showed a couple of headlines from the United States within the last 10 or so years. I had an example from 2025. I had an example from 2015. I think I also had one from 2011. So that's a little more than 10 years ago. But all of these, we were able to positively identify the substance as fungus, even though the priests initially thought that it was human heart tissue. Again, not by looking at it under a microscope. They were just priests. They weren't scientists. Yeah. So I think that we're starting to like look for fungus and stuff like that, which is great. I wish we would go back and look at these ones that have already been approved, and look at them. But there doesn't seem to be any appetite to do so. And I guess I get it to some degree. You don't want to cause like scandal. You don't want somebody to like lose their religion because they realized that they had thought that this was a real miracle and it actually was just fungus the whole time or something. So I understand there's nothing to gain and everything to lose approach, or that view. Like, I get it.
There was one thing I was thinking when I was watching the debate, and you raised these cases where it was proven to be fungi and stuff like that, that I think speaks against the purposeful fraud, at least in certain respects, for some of these things, because it looks like, well, look, the Roman Catholic Church is being honest when they do get conclusive proof that it's and I know Matt kind of challenged, well, is it conclusive or not? But let's assume that it is. When they think they have got good evidence that it's just a bacterial or fungi, they're up front and they say, look, this is a fraud, that don't believe this. So I just thought that might be a way to say, well, see, the Roman Catholic Church isn't as evil as they're saying. They're not hiding that. Look, we've got some false examples here, some false positives for Eucharistic miracles. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, an important thing to know is that it's not like the Roman Catholic Church is this one huge big organization and they all act the same way whenever there's a Eucharistic miracle. No. None of these things have actually made it to the Vatican. The local bishop is the one who's leading absolutely everything. And I think a lot of people who aren't Catholic have an understanding of the Catholic Church that like it's much more tightly knit and stuff than it really is. Dr. Castellan Gomez got permission from the Archbishop of Buenos Aires to do his Buenos Aires investigations. Then he got permission from the Archbishop of Tixla, Mexico, to do his Tixla, Mexico investigations. In every instance, you only need to go to the bishop of that diocese. And so it's not like the Catholic Church was treating all these in the same way. Obviously, the Catholic Church was not treating these all in the same way. The testing was very different from instance to instance to instance. And I think it's interesting. Like, I don't think that this means anything necessarily, but I do think it's interesting that there hasn't been a Eucharistic miracle in the United States. And I wonder if it's because the labs in the US are just a little bit more like this. The United States is where pharma is at. Like pharma, we invent the drugs that the rest of the world uses. 100%. Like just think about the largest pharma company in the world is Pfizer, headquartered in Connecticut. Merck is up there. I don't know if they're number 2, but Merck is one of the highest, headquartered in New Jersey. What about Bristol Myers Squibb, Philadelphia? That whole corridor from Boston to DC is just pharma, the whole thing. And so the fact that there hasn't been a Eucharistic miracle in the United States, to me, is very interesting. It doesn't prove anything, though. And so that it's not one of my like main points or anything. But to me, it's like, I wonder.
I could picture, I know what Matt would respond, kind of the same way our mutual friend Caleb Jackson does with miracle healings. Well, why is it always they take place in these third world countries, never where, proper investigate? And there is a theological point. You could say, well, God does the miracles where they're most needed, and he knows they're most needed there. So like, it's kind of hard to combat that, at least you'd have to go on a theological level, I guess, right?
Yeah. Maybe somebody would want to say something like, well, it's really needed in the US. The US is like 20% Catholic. Bolivia is 96% Catholic or something like that. Argentina is 90 whatever percent. They don't need another Eucharistic miracle. The US does. We're only 20% Catholic.
That is a good point. Yeah, like Buenos Aires had not just one, like that wasn't
5.
They had 3. 5. Okay.
5.
Okay.
Yeah, but 2 of them were like not tested like literally at all. One of them was hardly tested. They all occurred between 92 and 96. And really the only one that was like really, really tested was the 96 sample. But the 92 sample had some initial testing as well. And the 94 had a little bit of testing done on it. And then I think that like we're counting 94. There was like 3 separate miracles in 1994 or something like that. The timing of it is all very funny. I guess the 97% Argentina just really needed 5 Eucharistic miracles or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that is a good comeback, I admit. Yeah, that the theological retort would need some revision, I guess, or modification. But I do have one last question on Lignica before we move on, because it's going to the most important thing for me. Matt's point, Lignica the fraud hypothesis is false. It could not be faked. And his reasoning is, well, because the Lignica miracle, to be a fraud, you would have to have a team of fraudsters bring 15 samples of dying heart muscle to 2 different universities independently, while also preparing control samples to deceive the scientists. And this would just rule out the fraud. Did you want to respond on that? Do you think that's a good reason to rule fraud out with Lignica, or could there even be fraud type 2 behind the scenes type thing?
I'm really with Matthew on most of these fraud. I really don't think that any of I don't think that there's been fraud in the last 50 years with regards to these Eucharistic miracles. I think there's been things like testing into compliance, like bad science, I think has been done. But if the only place that I can think of appealing to fraud at all would be in the 16th century for Lanciano. Otherwise, I really don't see a ton of evidence of fraud. I just don't see it. I don't know. I'm with Matthew. I don't think that there's fraud at any of these, not beyond if we want to count things like, not publishing results and testing into compliance. If we want to count that as fraud, fine. But I don't think that anybody is switching out samples to try to fool scientists. Not at Legnica, not at any of these, not in the last 100 years or whatever. That's my opinion.
Yep, like Nika, I definitely agree. I think Matt's reasoning is pretty sound there for the ruling out fraud number two level kind of thing. So, all right, well, yeah, that's it with these specific miracle claims. I do have three general questions that I forgot to ask as well. But was there anything else about the specifics that you wanted to say, or
I have a general thing. I don't have a specific thing. Do you mind if I ask you a question?
absolutely, yeah.
Um, so something that I wasn't entirely anticipating was Matthew's point about the cumulative case.
Uh-huh.
I he I'm going to put words in his mouth again, and I shouldn't do that. But he said something to the effect of like, um, like the sum is greater than or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts or whatever. Where like even if each one of these cases might have something here or there that we could pick at, looking at them all together, it should be convincing. Um, I just don't know if I see it that way. I'm kind of one of those people where I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know if there's any number of people who could tell me. I mean, this isn't true. There's some amount of people out there who could tell me that they've seen Bigfoot, and then I would believe that Bigfoot's real. But like, I don't know if like globally there are like 10,000 people who all claim to have seen Bigfoot.
Mhm.
10,000 is a ton of people, man.
What?
That's not gonna move me. Do you know what I mean? So my question to you is, what do you think about the whole cumulative case point? Um, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so the way cumulative, I find there's a lot of confusion. Like even when it comes to the resurrection, like it's always, well, it's a cumulative case, and I find people don't really understand what they're saying when or understand, what does that mean in terms of an evaluation? And the way I look at it is you're evaluating the conjunction, right? So I would break up the different appearances, but then you're saying, okay, well, for the conjunction of an empty tomb and this appearance, that conjunction itself is somehow improbable. And with respect to Eucharistic miracles, I actually think the cumulative case appeal works against the misidentification hypothesis in this sense, in this specific sense, where the conjunction, when you have all of these scientists just looking through I forget what historonomy or something like that. What's the word that I'm
Histology,
histology, sorry.
histology, histology,
God.
which is
What's
the study of looking at organs on slides. I actually don't know what the root word there means. Let me look that up real quick. But it's histology.
And while
Uh,
you're looking that up, this is one. Now, again, it's complicated in this case because they're getting differing observations. But in the ideal sense, let's say we have 17 scientists or whatever, and they are world's experts, and they're all, you have this scientist side and this scientist side and this scientist. That does speak against, raises a cumulative case against, and they all couldn't tell bacteria from heart tissue. Now, again, that is there a clear difference? Is it true that it's like telling a 30-year pilot telling a runway from a potato field? If those are true, then I do think the cumulative case works for that type of argument. That's where I would see a cumulative case working, even if in isolation you couldn't establish the case for anything individually. Does that make sense?
yeah. How is the cumulative case impacted when you include all the scientists who looked at the same sample? So for Buenos Aires, for instance, um, and they all said that it's not, heart tissue. Um, or maybe
I
does
think
that not really influence it? Does that just mean that it actually is hard to tell a runway from a potato field?
I think that's why I think you raised the great point where like, well, is that an accurate summary? And I'm not sure it is because yeah, like you said, these world's experts are coming to not necessarily contradictory conclusions from what Matt said, and I don't know if he's right or not. I have no idea, but one is they're kind of vague versus one's the most specific with Zugby or something like that. It's problematic, and I wouldn't use a cumulative case with Buenos Aires. I would tend to just throw it out. But yeah, like with the heart tissue in why are these guys constantly finding heart tissue or some kind of tissue? Is there a reason for that conjunction with Lanciano, with Buenos Aires, with Tixla, with Soap? Is it conspiracy? Is it just are they seeing what they want to see because oh, I heard this guy found heart tissue, so I'm gonna jump at that? Like that in that case, the conjunction requires some kind of explanation. And it's just a question is it could it be explained without it actually being heart tissue in all these cases?
Yeah, I guess like my response to something like that would be like, yeah, I mean, clearly scientists are wrong about things all the time. We just have to look at Buenos Aires and see how it took them 7 tries to get the answer that they wanted to know that, yeah, scientists, and even if you look at the ones who didn't agree, a lot of them said skin. One of them said nothing at all. Two of them said muscle. Like, okay,
Yeah,
I guess it is kind of hard to tell these things apart.
yeah, but take Buenos Aires out of here because that's a problematic case. I'm saying take the other four things. They're all finding some kind of tissue, heart tissue, not bacteria or fungi or something like that. That in that case, I think the cumulative case would work, except for your counter saying that, well, actually, you can't tell. Like it's not the difference between a runway and a potato field. And if that's the case, then the cumulative case argument falls apart. But as as a non-scientist, I don't know. Is it true that it's that easy to spot the difference or not? I'm just kind of listening to you guys, and it sounds like you're saying different things. So I have no idea.
Yeah, I definitely do think that the people on the pro side want to make it sound like there's no way that these people could be wrong. And I also think that's why they want to talk so much about their expertise. Um,
Yeah.
but to me, this is where the DNA comes in. Like, if it's heart tissue, we should at least find the human STRs. Um, if not, find we could sequence the whole genome if we really wanted to. Again, that's expensive, but we should be able to tell what kind of DNA we're looking at here. And we're never finding it. To me, that is by far the biggest thing.
Okay. So wait, that's a falsification. You're saying, look, let's assume you're correct that there is heart tissue or any kind of tissue, skin, whatever you want to say. There would be detectable STRs. They went to try.
So easily detectable, so easily detectable. Like the
Okay.
amount we're talking about, like this much
Mhm.
organ tissue. Oh my gosh, that is thousands and thousands of times more than we need in order to detect those human STRs. Like we need a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of this much if we want to find those human STRs, and we're not finding them. What does that tell you? Either one, that it's supernatural DNA that God won't let us find because he's afraid of us cloning Jesus, or, and I say that very tongue in cheek, obviously, or number two, it's just not human. Whatever this thing is, it's just not human. This organic tissue here is non-human organic tissue.
Let me ask you this, just because I know about his counter is that, well, God couldn't give us DNA proper because then we'd clone Jesus and God doesn't do that. Let me just ask, could God have given us detectable STRs without giving us enough to clone Jesus? Then
Yes.
I would expect him to do that.
Yes. Your so when you, I don't know if you've ever done like 23andMe or
No,
ancestry.com or whatever.
I don't even know
Um
what STRs are. So,
that's fine. When you submit, you spit into the vial and you ship that to 23andMe, and then they email you your genetic profile, and they're like, oh, you're 17% Italian and 12% French and 13, whatever.
Mhm.
They're not actually looking at your entire genome. So they don't actually know what every single, like, they could not clone you if they wanted to.
Okay.
And there's no reason why we couldn't do 23andMe on these Eucharistic miracles. Now, obviously, not, I don't literally mean 23andMe, because the way that they do it is you spit into a tube, and we can't ask the Eucharistic miracle to spit for us. But we could do something very similar where we are not sequencing the entire genome, but we would be able to build a genetic profile out of it. And the very, like, baby's first step there would be identifying the 20 human STRs just to make sure that this is really, in fact, human genetic material. and we are not finding human genetic material, which to me is a clear indicator that whatever we're looking at is not human. It's organic material. I'm sure of it. I mean, bread is organic material. But
I will
the
just
stuff,
say, I wish you had made that clear during the debate, because that's a total game changer. You would have won the
I thought
debate.
I,
That would have,
I thought I did. Maybe I didn't. If I didn't,
maybe I'm in, so maybe
maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't.
I'm a bad listener, but I didn't get that point. But that would have been a game changer. I would have said you would have won the debate, because that would have falsified his strongest case. Like, you were good on the blood type AB and good on the DNA. But then he's like, but we've got the heart tissue. And I didn't understand the link between the lack of STRs as a falsification for the heart tissue. So if I understood that, hands down, you would have won the case.
Yeah, yeah, dude. The fact that we have something that looks like human heart tissue but tests negative for these human STRs, or rather, we look for them and we just don't find them.
What are STRs? Do you mind if I just
Short tandem repeats.
short
They
what?
are short tandem repeats. Let me make sure that that's correct. Let me
Okay.
Google that real quick. STRs. Let me look up. Oh, there's my cat. Hold on.
There's the smarter of the two.
He's the brains. I'm the brawn. Yep. Short tandem repeats. So do you remember in like high school biology learning about adenine and guanine and thymine and cytosine? Those are the four molecules that connect to each other in our DNA, like the two strands. And you
I
have
took physics, so
Oh, okay. Well, whenever one of those connects to the other one, that's called a base pair.
okay.
And STRs refer to any sequence of those base pairs between 2 and 7 base pairs long. And human STRs refer to sequences of these base pairs in a row that if we identify all of them, we're like, yeah, okay, boom, that's human. Only humans have those base pairs in that order.
I know what you're talking about. It's from my studies in intelligent design, but I know what you're talking about now. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that's all it is. It's a short tandem repeat. It's referring to a little section of DNA. So again, we're not looking at the whole genome. We're just we're kind of scanning the whole genome for these short sections that are like a sore thumb. We're like, that's human because it has those STRs right there. That sequence right there gives it away. It kind of gives up the we don't have to look at the whole thing. We see the STRs, boom, we're good. It's human.
Hey, that was revolutionary. Yeah, thank goodness that came up, because that, like I said, it totally changes my opinion. I was leaning in the favor of Matt. I still, again, too little, too late. This is after the debate, so I still have to say Matt won the debate. But in terms of what the truth is, I'm now fully with you. Like, I don't think Matt is correct anymore. There's nothing supernatural here. Provably supernatural, let's say that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This is why I stress the DNA thing so much. And maybe I didn't stress it enough during the debate.
Well, it was just the connection. You stressed it, but it was just making that connection between the heart argument and these STR things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's this idea that we have something that scientists are saying, yeah, this looks like heart tissue to me. And then we test it for the human STRs and we don't find them. And to me, that's like, well, then it's not human. Like, whatever it is, it's organic tissue. And maybe it does look like heart tissue, but like, it's not human. And so Dr. Franco Serafini, Matthieu knows all this, by the way. Matthieu still believes in them. And Matthieu just thinks that and again, I'm putting words into his mouth and I shouldn't do this, but Matthew's point here would be something like this. Yeah, look, we know that the DNA thing is tricky, okay? But the scientists said it sure looks like human heart tissue. And so it's almost, and this is what Dr. Serafini writes in his book, the lack of DNA is almost like evidence in itself of something supernatural going on here. Because we have all of these doctors being like, yeah, guys, this is heart tissue. And then we go to test the DNA and there is none. It's a repeating pattern of like a histologist looking at a slide saying, yep, looks like heart tissue. We go to find the heart tissue's DNA and we don't find any human DNA there. It's Dr. Serafini refers to it as paradoxical evidence. Now, if you ask me, this sounds like, I'm getting pulled over by the cop. The cop's like, you were going 90 miles an hour. And I'm like, officer, I understand that your gun pointed at my car, reading your radar gun or whatever. It reads 90 miles per hour. That evidence does correspond with me legitimately going 90 miles per hour, but it's actually paradoxical evidence of an invisible car traveling in front of me at the moment that you pointed your speed gun at me, and that car was moving at 90 and I was actually doing the speed limit. Like, is that paradoxical? I guess it is paradoxical evidence. I just don't think it's very good. That's my 2 cents.
Great point. Fair point. Fair. Okay. So you kind of covered two questions in one there, so that was great. I just have one last general question, and then I'm spent. But what it's based on your opening thing. The one thing that we didn't cover in terms of the methodological thing is blinding and blind testing, because during your Q&A, Matt did give a counter, and he said, actually, that's nonsense. We did have blind testing, maybe not official scientific standards blind, but there were certain scientists like Zogby were blind when they were quote unquote testing and stuff. So what was your response to that counter?
I'm going to be honest. I don't think I did respond to that during the back and forth,
I don't think you did. Yeah, I don't.
but let me tell you now. Um, I hate to sound like, so that blinding doesn't count in my opinion. Why? Because the people putting the report together were never blinded. Who's Dr. Ricardo Castellon Gomez knew the whole time. Ron Tesoriero and Mike Willisey knew the whole time. They then went to scientists, and I find the Zuckerberg thing hilarious because they call up a medical examiner and they're like, "Hey, man, we're paranormal investigators, and we're going to show up with cameras and film you and not tell you what the." Come on, come on, like. There's no way that he didn't expect. And this guy just so happened to have written a book on the shroud like a couple years earlier. Like, come on. That's why I think that the whole thing with like these scientists who are all Catholic friendly, like going back to Dr. Linoli from Lanciano when they did Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
Come on. Going to Dr. Latwowska, I'm definitely mispronouncing her name, but the one from Sokolka, after she had already worked for the archdiocese on the canonization of Saint Father, whatever his name was.
Yeah, I think Matt said she was even a witness to it in the church, right?
Oh my goodness, I forget if she was or wasn't. Maybe
in the video clip I just played, I think he said she was actually present at the time.
Okay,
whereas the other guy wasn't, or something. So.
Yeah. So I guess my point there is like there is actual scientific blinding, and then there's like the appearance of blinding. And actual blinding should have gone like this. Samples are submitted that are just like labeled, A, B, and C, where A is actual human heart tissue and B is a host that's been inoculated with fungus, and C is the actual host. But the scientists themselves who are doing this analysis do not know which one is which, and then they do the same analysis on each one. So they do blood type testing on each A, B, and C. They look at slides that are prepared of A, B, and C, slides that are prepared with like the eosin and with the silver, for each one. And they do genetic profiling on each one. And then they should have found like very clear, distinct human DNA in the one that is really human heart tissue, and they shouldn't have found any human DNA in the one that was inoculated with fungus. But this never happened. Or maybe it did happen and it just wasn't published. Who knows? Because none of this work is published. That's like the most frustrating part. So yeah, that's what like real blinding would look like.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, that kind of covers my questions and things I wanted to probe to from the debate. I'll ask you as the guest, is there any other topics that I haven't asked you about or haven't covered that you think are crucial to speak about or talk about?
I don't think so. I think that so in summary, the three main lines of evidence are the histology, the blood chemistry and hematology, and the genetic component. The histology part, there are legitimately a bunch of histologists and medical examiners who've looked at the slide and said, yep, looks like human heart tissue to me. Undeniable. There were some.
And for
Also
the,
undeniable that other scientists looked at the same slides and said, this is not human heart tissue. So that's the first piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence is the histology. I'm sorry, the blood chemistry and the hematology. And also credit where credit is due. They've done like hemoglobin tests, and they've gotten positive results there. They've also done other blood identification tests and gotten negative results there. So just like that first category, the histology, I'm going to call the hematology and the chemistry, I'm going to call that mixed as well. And then there's the genetic component, which is just a complete and total miss. So the way that I view it is that we have conflicting results on the histology. We have conflicting results on the chemistry and hematology, and then we have clearly one-sided results on the not human side, on the genetic side. I look at all of that, and clearly I fall on one side of the aisle. Matthieu knows all the same evidence that I do, and he falls on the other side of the aisle, and I think that's fine. I don't think it's so important where we wind up. I think it's way more important that we all have access to the same information. Unfortunately, the information on these Eucharistic miracles has been very, very difficult to find for a very long time. That seems to be changing now, in large part thanks to people like Matthieu and like Dr. Franco Serafini and like Dr. Kelly Kearse, who we did an episode with, like Dr. Stacy Trasankos, who is also excellent and also worth reaching out to, and everybody else who has worked on these miracles. So no matter where you wind up, I'm just grateful that you, dear audience, have more access to this information than anybody has had up until this point. What an exciting time for us to be alive. And no matter where you fall on the side of Eucharistic miracles, I'm just glad that we're all talking about it.
Awesome. Well said. Yeah. So that's Kevin Nontradicath. I don't know if people know your last name, so I'll just keep calling you that. But
Perfect.
yeah, it's great having you on the show there, Kevin. You're welcome back anytime for any topic. I thought you did a great job. Again, just on the debates, like I said, I do think you lost on the debate, but you won after the debate. I'm
Once Matthieu's not here, that's
yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, it's probably like the middle of the night for him, so I couldn't
yeah,
invite
it is.
at this time. But yeah, it's a great job to you. I thought you argued your case very well articulated and stuff like that, and understandable. And Matt did a phenomenal job as well, as I said. So kudos to both of you. That's probably the best debate on that topic that I've ever seen. So great job. And Kevin, before I go, I am going to give you a formal invitation to be a host or a moderator or a co-moderator on my upcoming debate with Hugh Ferry on his image forming hypothesis. I would be honored to have you play the role of a moderator for that debate if you'd like to.
I would love to. That's awesome. I'm so honored that you'd ask. And yeah, I'd love to. That sounds great.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm thinking of having on the pro shred side Daniel Lowry as the other moderator. So having moderators from both sides and then have you guys play a role. But yeah, that'll probably be a couple months down the line because I have to do bone up on my Walter McCrone. So I need to do some research. But yeah, it would be great to have you for that. So
I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to help moderate. And I'm sure that I'd be full of questions by the end of it too. So if you take questions from the moderators,
that's
I
my
think I'll
plan.
be full of them. Cool.
Absolutely. That's why I want both sides if possible. You and Daniel Lowry are awesome. So all right, cool. Well, yeah, that does it for this week. Next week in July, I don't know. I've got a bunch of shows. So I'm fulfilling
You're
fan
busy.
requests. I might be posting up my Satan-induced supernatural skeptical stupidity syndrome part 2. Uh, Kevin's like, huh? This is a funny term I invented back in my Skeptics and Seekers day, but it's kind of referring to skeptics, are blinded by Satan, and there are certain examples of that that I've noticed. So I'm giving kind of my funny polemical response to those. And then I do have Phil Bear, a debate with Phil Bear on Calvinism versus Molinism in mid-July. And then I have some other stuff that might come up. Rudy Ditchlittle. He was an original STIRT member and a scientist, and he's going to be sharing his background stories because he was best friends with Dr. John Jackson and Eric Jumper. And he's got some anecdotes that nobody's ever heard before. For example, did you know they all owned a hot air balloon business before getting into STIRP? Yeah, he's got fascinating
Random. Yeah.
random
That's cool.
stories. But yeah, so yeah, tune into that. You'll see what I got in July, but there's stuff in the works. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Dale. Always a pleasure.